The first thing I heard wasn't the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. It was my sister's voice. If Sophie never opens her eyes again, maybe that's the kindest ending for everyone. For a second, I thought exhaustion had twisted my mind into hearing monsters, where there were only worried relatives. I had been awake for nearly 3 days, sleeping in short bursts beside my 10-year-old daughter's hospital bed after the grandstand collapse at the Harvest Festival. But then she kept talking. Emily has spent her whole life making terrible decisions. She'll only drag Noah down the same road. Those children deserve someone who can actually give them a future. Every word landed harder than the last. My daughter was still alive. Machines were still helping her breathe. Doctors were still fighting to save her. And my own sister had already begun planning a future without her. I kept my eyes closed. Not because I was afraid, because something inside me knew the truth was finally walking into the light. What happened over the next 15 minutes would destroy my family forever. A respected financial advisor would lose everything she had spent 20 years building. A hidden family trust would expose a betrayal that had started long before my daughter was ever admitted to this hospital. And the smallest person in that room, my 8-year-old son Noah, would become the only adult brave enough to tell the truth. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 35 years old. Until that autumn weekend, I believed heartbreak came from losing people you loved. I had no idea it could also come from discovering who they really were, while your child was still fighting for her next breath. 3 days earlier, life still felt ordinary. Not easy, not comfortable, but ordinary. Saturday mornings always belonged to the Parker family. Our farmhouse sat just outside a small town near Sacramento, surrounded by vineyards that turned gold every autumn. It wasn't our land. I rented the old house from a retired couple who liked having someone care for the place while they traveled between California and Arizona. The roof leaked whenever winter storms rolled in. The kitchen cabinets never closed properly. The porch leaned slightly to one side. To Noah and Sophie, it was still home. Every Saturday, Sophie insisted on making pancakes, even though she always managed to burn the first batch. "That's the practice pancake," she'd laugh, scraping the black edges into the trash before starting over. Noah would pretend to be a professional food critic, taking one dramatic bite before announcing whether breakfast had earned enough stars. Those silly traditions mattered. Children remember moments far more than money. I worked as a veterinary technician at a small animal clinic 20 minutes away. The pay barely covered rent, groceries, and school expenses. So 3 evenings a week, I cleaned offices after the clinic closed. Most nights, I crawled into bed exhausted. Still, every morning, I packed 2 lunches with handwritten notes tucked beside the sandwiches. One for Sophie, one for Noah. Sometimes the notes were jokes. Sometimes they were little reminders. Sometimes they simply said, "I love you more than yesterday." Sophie kept every single one inside an old cookie tin beneath her bed. I didn't know that until much later. People often assume children only notice the things parents fail to provide. They're wrong. Children notice sacrifice. They notice who shows up. My younger brother Ethan certainly did. Whenever something broke around the farmhouse, he appeared carrying an old toolbox that had belonged to our father. He never accepted money. If Dad were here, he'd always say, tightening another loose hinge or repairing another broken fence. He'd tell me family doesn't send invoices. Then he'd grin and ask if I had any coffee left. Victoria, on the other hand, measured success differently. She lived in a gated neighborhood overlooking the river. Her home looked like something from an architectural magazine. Glass walls, imported stone floors, a temperature-controlled wine cellar larger than my entire living room. She managed wealth portfolios for executives, athletes, and business owners. Clients trusted her with fortunes most people could never imagine. Victoria believed discipline solved every problem. She believed emotions clouded judgment. Most of all, she believed financial success proved moral superiority. She never criticized me directly anymore. She had learned something far more effective. Questions. Emily, have you ever considered that the children would have more opportunities in a better school district? Wouldn't Noah benefit from private education? Do you really think Sophie should spend weekends helping around the house instead of attending enrichment programs? Each question sounded harmless. Each one quietly suggested I wasn't enough. I usually smiled and changed the subject. Arguing with Victoria was like wrestling smoke. She always looked calm, while everyone else looked emotional. 2 weeks before the Harvest Festival, she surprised us by volunteering to sponsor Sophie's school art project. Teachers praised her generosity, parents thanked her publicly. Even Sophie hugged her and called her the coolest aunt ever. Victoria smiled exactly the way cameras like people to smile. Perfect, measured, impossible to read. Looking back now, I realize she wasn't investing in the school. She was investing in appearances. At the time, I thought maybe she had finally softened. Maybe grief had changed her after our father passed away the previous year. Maybe we were becoming sisters again. I wanted to believe that. Sometimes hope is simply another way people ignore warning signs. The Harvest Festival arrived under bright blue skies and cool autumn air. The entire town gathered at the community fairgrounds. Children painted pumpkins. Local bands played country music. Families wandered between food trucks carrying caramel apples and hot cider. Sophie had been chosen to present her wildlife sculpture during the afternoon youth exhibition. She'd spent nearly 6 weeks building it from recycled wood, broken pieces of fencing, and polished river stones Ethan had helped her collect. She called it the Heart of the Valley. Before walking onto the exhibition platform, she squeezed my hand. "If I win," she whispered, "can we celebrate with milkshakes?" I kissed the top of her head. "If you lose, we're still getting milkshakes," she laughed. That was the last time I heard her laugh before everything fell apart. The applause had barely begun when the sound echoed across the fairgrounds. At first, people thought it was part of the demonstration. A deep metallic groan rolled through the air, followed by terrified screams. Someone shouted, "Move!" The wooden viewing platform shifted sideways. One support beam snapped like dry firewood, then another. Everything happened too fast for the human mind to separate one moment from the next. Children stumbled. Parents lunged forward. Metal railings twisted as nearly 40 people crashed toward the ground. I remember seeing Sophie's bright blue jacket disappearing beneath splintered lumber. Then I was running. I don't remember dropping my purse. I don't remember pushing through the crowd. I only remember screaming her name until my throat burned. Volunteers and firefighters were already pulling people free. Someone grabbed my shoulders. "You can't go in there. My daughter is under that platform." The words tore out of me like something alive. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a firefighter emerged carrying Sophie. Her face was pale beneath streaks of dust. One arm hung unnaturally still. Blood soaked through the sleeve of her jacket. Her eyes never opened. The ambulance doors slammed shut before I could climb inside. Another paramedic pulled me into the front seat, while someone drove Noah behind us with a police officer. The sirens never seemed loud enough. At Mercy Regional Medical Center, everything blurred into signatures, consent forms, and medical terminology I barely understood. Internal bleeding, severe head trauma, collapsed lung, possible spinal injuries. Every sentence seemed to steal another piece of air from the room. Dr. Michael Brooks met me outside the operating suite. He looked calm in the way only experienced trauma surgeons can. "We're doing everything possible," he said. "I need you to prepare for a long surgery." "Will she wake up?" He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than words ever could. "We're going to fight for her." For 9 endless hours, I watched the digital surgery clock on the waiting room wall. Families came and went. Coffee turned cold. Sunlight faded beyond the windows. Noah sat beside me without complaining once. He held Sophie's friendship bracelet in both hands as though letting go might somehow let go of her too. Late that evening, Ethan arrived still wearing his work boots, his jeans stained with engine grease. He wrapped both arms around me without saying anything. Sometimes silence carries more comfort than speeches. Victoria arrived almost an hour later. She looked immaculate despite the emergency. Tailored navy coat, perfect makeup, hair untouched by the wind outside. She embraced me gently. "I'm here now," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone." Most people would have heard kindness. I heard control. Not because of what she said, because of what came next. Without asking, she began organizing everyone. She spoke to nurses. She answered relatives' questions. She contacted people I hadn't even remembered to call. She moved through the hospital as though she'd been waiting for an opportunity to take charge. When Dr. Brooks finally returned close to midnight, Exhaustion covered every line of his face. The surgery was successful, he said. But the swelling inside her brain is significant. He explained that Sophie would remain in a medically induced coma while her body recovered. The next several days are critical. Hope and fear arrived together. One refused to leave without the other. Our family settled into a routine inside the intensive care unit. Ethan brought fresh clothes. Neighbors delivered meals we rarely touched. Teachers left handmade cards from Sophie's classmates. Even strangers from town stopped by to offer prayers after hearing about the collapse. Only Victoria never seemed tired. She made phone calls in quiet hallways. She spoke with hospital administrators. She insisted on reviewing paperwork before handing anything to me. Whenever someone praised how organized she was, she'd smile modestly. "I'm only trying to help Emily make good decisions." Good decisions. The phrase appeared again and again, too often. By the second night, I noticed something else. Whenever doctors discussed Sophie's condition, Victoria always steered the conversation toward the future instead of recovery. What happens if permanent care is required? What kind of rehabilitation costs are typical? How soon would legal guardianship become necessary if Emily couldn't manage everything? Each question sounded practical, responsible, almost compassionate. Yet every one of them assumed the same thing, that Sophie wouldn't come back to us. Dr. Brooks answered politely, but I caught a brief look in his eyes. He didn't like where those conversations kept leading. Neither did Ethan. He pulled me aside near the vending machines just before midnight. "Has Victoria always been asking questions like that?" I hesitated. I thought she was trying to help. Ethan stared toward the ICU doors. "I hope you're right." For the first time since the accident, I wasn't sure I was. The third morning began with rain, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the hills outside the intensive care unit windows. Inside room 417, nothing changed except the calendar. Sophie's chest still rose and fell with the help of machines. The monitors still measured every heartbeat, and I was beginning to forget what uninterrupted sleep even felt like. At some point, exhaustion simply becomes another part of your body. Dr. Brooks reviewed Sophie's latest brain scans just after sunrise. "The swelling hasn't increased," he said, placing the images against the light panel. "That's encouraging." I searched his face for something stronger than encouraging. Hope, confidence, anything. Instead, he sighed quietly. "She's still in a very delicate place." Those words followed me back into the room. Victoria was already there. She had replaced the wilted flowers with fresh white lilies. She'd arranged bottles of water, snacks, and neatly labeled folders across the family waiting area. Everything looked organized, controlled, almost staged. "You need to think ahead," she said, as I sat beside Sophie's bed. "I already am," she smiled gently. "No, Emily, you're thinking like a mother. You'll have to start thinking like someone making difficult legal decisions." I stared at her. "My daughter isn't dying." I didn't say she was. But miracles don't erase reality. Before I could answer, Noah quietly entered carrying the sketchbook he'd refused to leave at home. Instead of drawing superheroes like he usually did, he sat beside Sophie's bed and carefully began sketching the vineyard behind our farmhouse. Every few minutes, he'd glance toward the adults, not speaking, simply watching. It reminded me of something my father used to say. "The quiet ones usually hear the truth first." Later that afternoon, another specialist joined Dr. Brooks to discuss Sophie's condition. They explained that if the pressure inside her skull didn't begin decreasing naturally, emergency surgery might become necessary. The procedure carried serious risks. It could save her life. It could also change it forever. Before I even had time to ask questions, Victoria spoke. "If neurological damage is already extensive, shouldn't quality of life become part of this conversation?" The room fell silent. Dr. Brooks folded his arms. "Our responsibility is to save our patient." "Of course," Victoria answered smoothly. "I'm only asking families to consider every possibility." Families. Not me. Families. As though I were only one vote among many. That single word stayed with me long after the doctors left. Something about this no longer felt like concern. It felt like preparation. That evening, Ethan returned carrying homemade soup from one of our neighbors. He noticed my untouched dinner sitting beside the window. "You haven't eaten." "I'm not hungry." "You haven't slept either." I'll sleep after Sophie wakes up. He didn't argue. He simply sat beside Noah, helping him finish the puzzle he'd been working on all afternoon. Neither of them noticed Victoria standing just outside the partially open door. She wasn't looking at Sophie. She wasn't looking at me. She was quietly reading the nameplate on a thick legal envelope someone had delivered to the nurse's station only minutes earlier. When she realized I had seen her, she smiled almost too quickly. I was just making sure nothing important gets overlooked. She walked away before I could respond. I looked toward the envelope again. It bore the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. No one had mentioned legal documents. No one had asked me to sign anything. Yet somehow Victoria already seemed to know they were coming. For the first time since Sophie's accident, a different kind of fear settled into my chest. It wasn't fear of losing my daughter. It was the growing realization that someone else had been planning for this moment long before any of us ever arrived at the hospital. By the fourth day, the hospital had become its own strange little world. Nurses greeted us by name. The coffee machine on the third floor knew exactly how much money I had left. Even the security guard at the east entrance gave Noah a quiet wave every morning before schoolbooks and sketch pads replaced playgrounds. Life outside those walls kept moving. Inside, every minute seemed suspended. Just after lunch, a woman in a charcoal gray suit asked to speak with me privately. "I'm Claire Whitmore," she said, extending a business card. "I'm a senior associate with Reed & Holloway." The name meant nothing to me. "I'm sorry," I replied. "Have we met before?" "No." Her expression softened. "But someone very close to your family retained our firm several years ago." Before she could continue, Victoria appeared almost instantly, as if she had been waiting nearby. "There you are," she said warmly. "Emily, Dr. Brooks has been looking for you." Claire glanced between us. "I only need a few minutes." Victoria stepped forward with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "This probably isn't the best time. My sister has enough on her mind." "I'll decide that," I said quietly. For the first time in days, Victoria's smile faltered. Only slightly. Claire waited until Victoria walked a few steps away before lowering her voice. "I don't want to overwhelm you. This conversation isn't urgent today." "Then why are you here?" "Our office administers a private family trust created by your late father." I blinked. "My father?" She nodded. "He updated the trust approximately 18 months before his passing." My heartbeat quickened. Dad never mentioned a trust. Many clients prefer confidentiality until certain conditions are met. She opened a leather portfolio but stopped before revealing the documents. "There are provisions affecting both you and your children." "What kind of provisions?" "I'm not legally permitted to discuss the details until your identity has been formally verified and all designated parties are present." Something in her tone told me this wasn't routine paperwork. It was important, very important. As Claire gathered her papers, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Please don't sign anything related to guardianship or estate matters until we've completed our review." Guardianship. The word echoed in my mind. "I haven't signed anything." She held my gaze for a moment. "I'm glad to hear that." Then she quietly left. I stood there staring at the unopened envelope. Across the hallway, I noticed Victoria pretending to scroll through her phone. She wasn't reading. She was watching us, watching me, watching the envelope. That evening, Ethan arrived just as visiting hours were ending. When I told him about Claire and the family trust, he frowned. "Dad barely trusted banks." "I know. So why would he create a trust without telling us?" Neither of us had an answer. Noah, who had been quietly drawing beside Sophie's bed, suddenly looked up. "I've seen that lady before." Ethan turned. "What lady?" "The lawyer." "When?" "The day after Sophie got here." Both of us stared at him. "She was talking to Aunt Victoria outside the elevators." "What were they talking about?" I asked gently. Noah shrugged. "I couldn't hear everything." He hesitated, searching his memory. "But Aunt Victoria kept saying—" He paused. "Everything has to happen in the right order." The room fell silent. Children rarely understand the importance of what they overhear. They simply remember it. Every word, every face, every strange look adults think no one notices. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep in the recliner beside Sophie's bed, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. It wasn't from my father. It wasn't from the law firm. It contained only one sentence. Do not let anyone pressure you into temporary guardianship before the trust review is complete. There was no signature, no explanation, only those 14 words. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't just afraid. I knew someone was playing a game I didn't yet understand, and somehow, Victoria already knew the rules. The following morning began with a decision no parent should ever have to make. Dr. Brooks gathered me inside a private consultation room. Several new scans covered the light board behind him. The pressure inside Sophie's brain has started climbing again. He pointed to a bright area near the center of one image. Our window is narrowing. He explained the surgery carefully. Removing a section of her skull would relieve the pressure and give her brain room to recover. It carried enormous risks. Without it, the odds became much worse. I never hesitated. When do we start? As soon as you sign the surgical consent. A nurse placed the paperwork in front of me. My hand had barely touched the pen when the conference room door opened. Victoria stepped inside. I think Emily needs a little more time. Dr. Brooks looked up. Excuse me? My sister hasn't slept properly in days. She's under tremendous emotional stress. I believe any major legal or medical decisions should wait until she receives proper counseling. The room turned cold. This is not a legal consultation, Dr. Brooks replied firmly. This is emergency medicine. Victoria folded her arms. I'm simply asking everyone to slow down. No, I answered quietly. I'm asking everyone to save my daughter. For the first time, the kindness disappeared from her face, only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. If that's truly what you want. She left without another word. Dr. Brooks watched the door close before speaking again. Mrs. Parker, I normally stay out of family matters, but I strongly recommend that every decision concerning your children be made by you, and only you. His words settled heavily inside me. Someone else had noticed. I signed the consent forms. Less than 20 minutes later, Sophie was wheeled toward surgery. As the operating room doors closed, Noah slipped his small hand into mine. Mom, I remember something else. I looked down. What is it? The night Aunt Victoria talked to that lawyer. He frowned, concentrating. She wasn't scared. She sounded happy. What did she say? Noah looked toward the empty hallway before answering. She said, once Emily signs temporary guardianship, everything transfers automatically. Every muscle in my body tightened. Are you sure? He nodded immediately. I remember because I didn't know what guardianship meant. I asked Aunt Victoria later. What did she tell you? She smiled. He swallowed. She said it was just grown-up paperwork. At that exact moment, Claire Whitmore appeared at the end of the corridor carrying 2 thick binders. This time, she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Jonathan Reed, the founding attorney whose name appeared on every letter from the firm. He approached with calm confidence. Mrs. Parker? Yes. I'm afraid we've discovered something that requires your immediate attention. Victoria stepped out of the nearby family lounge almost instantly. You couldn't wait until after surgery? Jonathan didn't even look at her. No, this matter cannot wait. He opened one binder. Your father's trust contains a clause that has never been activated. Victoria's expression changed. Just slightly, enough for me to notice. Jonathan continued. If any individual attempts to obtain guardianship of your children through deception, coercion, or material misrepresentation. He paused. That individual immediately forfeits every financial interest connected to the Parker Family Trust and becomes permanently disqualified from serving as guardian. Silence swallowed the hallway. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria looked afraid, real fear, not for Sophie, for herself. Jonathan slowly removed another folder. We also have written evidence suggesting someone may already have attempted exactly that. Victoria took one involuntary step backward, and I realized something that hadn't crossed my mind until then. She hadn't been waiting for Sophie to recover. She had been waiting for me to break. Because she believed grief would make me sign anything placed in front of me. She was wrong. The following morning began with a decision no parent should ever have to make. Dr. Brooks gathered me inside a private consultation room. Several new scans covered the light board behind him. The pressure inside Sophie's brain has started climbing again. He pointed to a bright area near the center of one image. Our window is narrowing. He explained the surgery carefully. Removing a section of her skull would relieve the pressure and give her brain room to recover. It carried enormous risks. Without it, the odds became much worse. I never hesitated. When do we start? As soon as you sign the surgical consent. A nurse placed the paperwork in front of me. My hand had barely touched the pen when the conference room door opened. Victoria stepped inside. I think Emily needs a little more time. Dr. Brooks looked up. Excuse me? My sister hasn't slept properly in days. She's under tremendous emotional stress. I believe any major legal or medical decisions should wait until she receives proper counseling. The room turned cold. This is not a legal consultation, Dr. Brooks replied firmly. This is emergency medicine. Victoria folded her arms. I'm simply asking everyone to slow down. No, I answered quietly. I'm asking everyone to save my daughter. For the first time, the kindness disappeared from her face, only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. If that's truly what you want. She left without another word. Dr. Brooks watched the door close before speaking again. Mrs. Parker, I normally stay out of family matters, but I strongly recommend that every decision concerning your children be made by you and only you. His words settled heavily inside me. Someone else had noticed. I signed the consent forms. Less than 20 minutes later, Sophie was wheeled toward surgery. As the operating room doors closed, Noah slipped his small hand into mine. Mom, I remember something else. I looked down. What is it? The night Aunt Victoria talked to that lawyer. He frowned, concentrating. She wasn't scared. She sounded happy. What did she say? Noah looked toward the empty hallway before answering. She said, once Emily signs temporary guardianship, everything transfers automatically. Every muscle in my body tightened. Are you sure? He nodded immediately. I remember because I didn't know what guardianship meant. I asked Aunt Victoria later. What did she tell you? She smiled. He swallowed. She said it was just grown-up paperwork. At that exact moment, Claire Whitmore appeared at the end of the corridor carrying 2 thick binders. This time she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Jonathan Reed, the founding attorney whose name appeared on every letter from the firm. He approached with calm confidence. Mrs. Parker? Yes. I'm afraid we've discovered something that requires your immediate attention. Victoria stepped out of the nearby family lounge almost instantly. You couldn't wait until after surgery? Jonathan didn't even look at her. No. This matter cannot wait. He opened one binder. Your father's trust contains a clause that has never been activated. Victoria's expression changed, just slightly, enough for me to notice. Jonathan continued. If any individual attempts to obtain guardianship of your children through deception, coercion, or material misrepresentation, he paused. That individual immediately forfeits every financial interest connected to the Parker family trust and becomes permanently disqualified from serving as guardian. Silence swallowed the hallway. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria looked afraid. Real fear, not for Sophie, for herself. Jonathan slowly removed another folder. We also have written evidence suggesting someone may already have attempted exactly that. Victoria took one involuntary step backward, and I realized something that hadn't crossed my mind until then. She hadn't been waiting for Sophie to recover. She had been waiting for me to break, because she believed grief would make me sign anything placed in front of me. She was wrong. 3 weeks later, the machines began disappearing from Sophie's room. First the ventilator, then the feeding tubes. A few days later, the constant alarms that had once filled every hour became nothing more than an occasional beep from a portable monitor. Recovery wasn't dramatic. It was painfully slow. Sophie had to learn simple things again. Holding a spoon, standing without becoming dizzy, remembering conversations from the days before the harvest festival. Every small victory felt enormous. The first time she walked 6 steps with her physical therapist, Noah clapped so loudly that nurses came into the hallway to see what had happened. When she finally laughed again, Dr. Brooks smiled from the doorway. I've been waiting to hear that sound. So have we, I answered. He looked at Sophie for a long moment. I told you children are remarkable. I smiled through tears. No, doctor. My children are. Several days later, Jonathan Reed visited our home, not the hospital, home. He carried only one folder this time. The trust review is officially complete. He placed the documents on our old kitchen table. My father hadn't left millions of dollars. He had left something far more valuable: security. The trust paid for Sophie's medical treatment. It established education funds for both children. It covered enough expenses that I could leave my evening cleaning job and spend my nights where they belonged. At home, with Noah and Sophie. There were conditions, however. The funds could never be used for luxury purchases, only education, healthcare, housing, or opportunities that directly benefited the children. I laughed softly after reading the final page. That sounds exactly like Dad, Jonathan smiled. He wanted his grandchildren to inherit stability, not entitlement. Life slowly found its rhythm again. The farmhouse still leaned a little. The porch still creaked every morning. Our kitchen cabinets still refused to close properly. None of that mattered anymore. One Saturday morning, almost 4 months after the accident, Sophie insisted on making pancakes again. She burned the first one, exactly like always. Noah looked at it critically before announcing, "Practice pancake." We all burst into laughter. It was the ordinary sound I had missed more than anything. Not long afterward, my mother knocked on the front door. She looked older than I remembered. Not because of time, because of regret. She held a small cardboard box in both hands. "I found these in your father's workshop." Inside were dozens of photographs, camping trips, school plays, birthday parties. Every picture reminded me that love had always been measured in moments, never possessions. She lowered her eyes. "I should have defended you. You shouldn't have faced any of that alone." I took her hands. "We all failed each other in different ways." She began to cry. "So, can we start over?" I nodded. "As a family. Not the family we used to pretend we were. The family willing to tell the truth." Months later, the investigation into Victoria's financial practice became public. Several former clients came forward. The licensing board permanently revoked her certification. Civil lawsuits followed. I never celebrated any of it. Watching another person lose everything isn't a victory. It's simply the final consequence of choices made over many years. The real victory stood beside me every evening. Sophie's strength returned little by little. Noah still carried his sketchbook everywhere. Only now, every drawing included 4 people instead of 3. One evening, I asked him why. He smiled without looking up. "Grandpa," I frowned gently, "but Grandpa isn't here." "He kind of is." He tapped the page. "He protected us before any of this happened." I looked at the drawing, a little farmhouse, rolling vineyards, a family holding hands beneath a wide California sky, and, standing quietly beneath an old oak tree, a man with a weathered hat watching over them. Maybe Noah was right. Some people continue protecting the ones they love long after they're gone. That night, after I tucked both children into bed, Sophie called my name. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you know what I remembered today?" "What?" "The last thing I saw before the platform collapsed." "What was it?" "You." She smiled sleepily. "You were already running toward me." I brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "I'll always run toward you. No matter what." As I switched off the bedroom light, I realized something that no courtroom, no trust fund, and no legal victory could ever teach. Families aren't defined by the people who share your last name. They're defined by the people who refuse to let go when life gives them every reason to walk away. Love doesn't need wealth to survive, but it does require courage. The courage to stand beside someone when they're at their weakest. The courage to tell the truth when deception seems easier. And sometimes, the courage of one quiet little boy is enough to remind an entire family what love was supposed to look like all along.